Yo, what up guys, it's ARTFX. This is another video in the how to make a reese bass video series where I'm going to be talking how to make reese basses. I did two videos so far, the first one being how to make the initial patches, where I showed you how to make a simple reese bass patch in a couple of different synthesizers, and in the second video I talked about why mono is really important when making bass and how you can use mono to make sure that you're not going to get any phase issues when you're going to be working in a stereo track and then converting that to mono. So those were the first two videos. Now, if you guys are wondering why there is a little thing in the bottom left of the screen, that's actually a join link to my Discord server. So that'll show you how many people are currently online in my music production chat on Discord, and if you want to join, use that link that's right next to it, or go to the description below this video. You'll find the same link right there. That being said, I think it's gonna be a good video today to talk about resampling reeses. Right now I have my mono reese that I created last time, and I think this is a good moment to actually start resampling this and kind of like, well, try to come up with different results that we can, well, further manipulate later on. I'm by no means making the final reese bass right now. Plus I don't even know if I'm going to be using this reese in the tune that I was working on, because long story short, when you're making bass sounds, you're usually just making sounds and you're just gonna, well, hope that it works, I guess. But a lot of times you will come up with sounds that don't necessarily work for the track you're working on right now. But don't worry, you know, just save those sounds. Export them to samples or save the patches, so that you can use them later on when you actually need a sound like that. Because that's the whole thing, you just gotta make sure that you have a wide array of sounds that you can actually use in your tracks, so that whenever you need one of those, you don't have to make them from scratch. You can just load them up and work, you know, make music. That's what it's all about. You don't want to kill your creativity, you don't want to kill that idea that you have just because you gotta, you know, spend an hour or spend 2 hours making this perfect reese bass patch. No need to do that if you actually make patches beforehand or make samples beforehand that you can just load up. So that's what I do a lot, and that's also what I'm doing right here. So I've got the reese bass, which is completely mono now. We can see that if we just look here. There are some volume differences and we do lose a little bit of bass around this middle region, but we can take care of that, you know. We can always bring the bass back up if we have to. For now it's just about the modulation and the sound of it. Now, this being completely mono now, I think we could, for instance, add a little bit of filtering to it. So there are a bunch of effects that really work well when making reese basses or making neuro basses, and one of them is a notch filter. So a notch filter is essentially just, it just cuts out the really selective band of frequencies, which is actually a notch, and it will just cut out that small little band, and you can just move that around, and by changing the resonance you're actually changing the width of that notch, of that cut. And you can also choose between 12 with 24 dB per octave curve, which is actually going to change the steepness of the slope of the notch filter. So on 12 dB it's going to be a bit steeper, and at 24 it's actually going to cut out more of the sound. Now that is slightly like the opposite what you would get when you are working with a low pass filter. With a low pass filter, I can show you, if we are on 12, and let me just bring this down a bit, you can see we have a really gentle slope, and as soon as I switch to 24 we get a steeper slope. Whereas with a notch, it actually has a steeper curve on the 12 dB per octave, but when we switch to 24 it just makes the cut wider. It is not necessarily steeper, but it just widens up the cut. So that's a little thing you gotta be aware of when you're working with notches. It kind of like responds in a different way. Now, what does a notch actually sound like? I can show you. You can hear that it really just cuts out a certain band of frequencies. Now, what I usually would do is take a notch filter and just start automating it. And I'm doing this pretty random, actually. Now, the key to this kind of thing is to not overdo your automation on this point. It's really easy to go overboard with your automation and just go in and automate all these parameters, and it's also really easy to just go in here and create these really quick automations. But when I am resampling sounds, I try to do slow automations pretty much all the time, and the reason for that is being I just want to create movement, and I don't want, well, I don't know if I'm actually gonna need a quick or a slow movement. So working with slow movement right now is gonna make it easier for us to actually be able to put this into a track. Because let's say I put this into a track and I decide it needs a quicker movement. I can always add that later on. But if I add the quick movement right now and then bounce this sample to audio, which we've resampled, it's there and we can't change it. So it's gonna be quick that way. And if I then later on decide, I throw it in a track and decide like, hey, I need this modulation, but I need it a little bit slower, I can't change that anymore. So that's why I always try to well, keep the automation really subtle right now, or make them really slow moving automations. Doing that makes it just easier for you to be able to put this into a track later on. So this has already changed the sound, okay? So the thing what we do get now is we lose a little bit of volume, and that is because we're cutting out a whole bunch of frequencies. So what I like to do is after I filter something, I usually add like a compressor or a multiband compressor, and one of the ones that we can always try is the OTT preset for the multiband dynamics, which actually just completely squashes the sound, and it'll bring up the frequencies that are lost now. But because we're cutting some out completely, it won't bring those back up. It will just bring the ones up that are brought down a lot but are still there but really quiet. It'll just bring those back up. And I find it also really brings up the high end in the bass. So it's not always the best solution to do. It doesn't always sound good, but it's always a good one to try. So I'm gonna take my headphones right now because I need to be able to actually listen to this clearly. So it does bring it up really quite a lot. The only thing though is that we lose a little bit of bass. So maybe if I bring this amount down, we get some of that bass back. Now, this is one process that I've now done, but we can do a lot more to this, obviously. There are a lot of effects that you can work with when you're doing resampling, and a whole array of effects that work are stuff like, let's say, chorus, flangers, phasers, distortion, obviously, filtering, EQs, compression would work. Let's see, we could do some bit crushing maybe. There's a whole bunch of things that could work. You could do a vocoder, but the most important thing is to just experiment, because you never know what's gonna happen until you try it. So I now have this, which sounds pretty good, but to make this reese much more interesting, we can try to do some parallel processing. When you process things parallel, you're actually splitting up the sound in multiple chains, and then you're adding effects to each chain individually, and then those are being mixed back together, which results usually in a more complex sounding bass, or you can just turn a bass into a much more interesting thing. So bear with me, because I usually, when I make these basses, I can be sitting there just fiddling around and experimenting for hours until I find something I really like. So if the end result by the end of this video isn't necessarily good, that's probably good because I normally would spend a lot more time on this. I'm just trying to showcase this right now. So what we can do, we can put in an audio effect rack. Now the audio effect rack is what you would use to split up a sound into multiple chains. I can, let's say I'm gonna take an amp, or let me just create one chain first, and I'm gonna call this one dry. So this is my dry chain, and if I just solo this one, I'm gonna hear the sound just the way it is, and I can use this to mix a little bit of the dry signal back into the processed ones to kind of like reinforce the bass again. Right now it's gonna sound exactly the same as what we had earlier. Now, to get started processing this, I'm gonna mute this chain because I don't want to hear it right now. I want to hear what I'm actually working on. I'm gonna use a filter and I'm gonna drop it below the dry chain. So this is gonna be my effect chain 1. And I'm gonna use a bandpass filter for this. So a bandpass filter is another one that's used a lot in neuro and drum and bass and dubstep kind of sounds because it just sounds interesting. But there's one big issue with bandpass filters on bass, is that you hear just a really specific band of frequencies. It's kind of like the opposite of a notch or a band reject filter. So instead of hearing a lot of low end and a lot of high end and just missing a small little gap in between, you're now actually hearing just that little gap. You're just hearing that small band of frequencies, and it's cutting everything on the lows and on the highs. So what is the issue with this on bass, you might ask? Well, when we have this really low, it sounds good and it sounds nice when we move this up. But the only downside is we suddenly lose all the sub-bass frequencies. So if you use a bandpass, and that is like the only filter you're using next to the dry chain, you definitely want to bring that dry chain back in, or you might even want to put a low pass on here and then bring it back in, so that you have like a really clear sub bass and low mids sitting there. And when you bring this up into the higher part of the frequency spectrum, you're still gonna have that sub because it's coming from the separate chain. So those are things you can do when you're doing parallel processing. Right now I'm not gonna reinforce the bass at this point because I just want to add movement to this reese. So I'm gonna try and automate this. We could automate the filter frequency, or we could use the LFO. Now I'm going to try to use the LFO. I'm going to set it to a slow rate again because I want to have a subtle movement. Let's try 2 bars and bring this up. So that adds a good bit of movement. Now one thing we could do is automate the filter frequency as well, so that we kind of like change where the modulation is going. It's gonna make it a slightly different sound. It's not gonna have a huge effect, I think. So that sounds good. Now that's our first chain. Now let's go in here and create another chain. I'm gonna call this one effect chain 2, and on this one I'm gonna do another filter. However, on this one I'm gonna use a notch filter again. So let's just do a notch, and I'm gonna do the same thing, except I'm gonna do a 4 bar rate. And I'm going to bring this up again. So you can see that also brought back the sub bass, because we're now not actually cutting the sub. We're just cutting this band of frequencies. And I can show you what it sounds like without the bandpass in it. the bandpass just adds a bit more movement, and I can automate this as well. Let's say I might want to do something like this, bring this up quite a lot, and then let's just drop it down. So now we've done that, let's try and see what we can do if we start processing these two chains a little bit further. I'm gonna solo the bandpass one. Now I've used a quite narrow bandpass. I've used the 24 dB per octave slope, which means it's a really narrow band. So it's just a really specific kind of thing that we're hearing now, and I can show you in the spectrum. You can see it's just like a band of frequencies moving back and forth. I guess spectrum is not that good at showing you exactly what is going on. You know, I might just go in here and use span, Voxengo span, which is a little bit more accurate, I think, in showing us what it's actually doing. So see, you can really see it's like a really specific band of frequencies that we're hearing. So a thing I noticed right away is that we do have a little bit of sub-frequencies in this layer, which I don't think we want, because what that's gonna do, it's actually, we have all our sub right here in the notch filter one. You can see. So I don't want to have the sub bass in the bandpass one, because that'll actually start layering and stacking on top of the sub bass in the notch filter one, meaning that the sub will suddenly get louder as soon as the bandpass goes a little bit low. But I do like the sound of it, so I'm not gonna actually change the bandpass. I'm just going to add a little high pass to the bandpass layer, and to see about there. Now it doesn't go all the way down to the sub frequencies. So what can we do to process this? Well, let's say I want to add a little bit of tube, a little bit of distortion to this layer. Let's bring the bias up. It's not really doing that much, so let's try something else. We could try the erosion, which is also a distortion plugin. Just add a little bit of that. Let's see, we might be able to add a phaser onto this one and see how that sounds. So I'm really just trying to come up with something that sounds interesting. Maybe the resonator would be cool. Resonators are always interesting to use on bass sounds because you can really like change the tone of the sound, I guess. So So it just changes the sound slightly. Now I'm gonna add a compressor to this layer, because I really just want to compress the shit out of this. This will make sure that we're just gonna bring everything up. So that's the first layer. We've added a bit of processing to that, and it's sounding a bit different now. So with the notch filter in it as well, and it's not that different yet, it's just a slight difference now that we've created. Let's go to the notch filter. And let's start processing this one as well. I'm gonna start out with adding a cabinet to this. Now, I don't necessarily always use the cabinet. It changes the sound quite a bit, but I think it's a nice one to try out. Let's try one of these presets. Just adds a slight different sound to it, which I like. Let's see, what else can we do here? I've already done a phaser on the other layer, so I don't think I want to do a phaser here. I might want to do something with a VST plugin, with a third-party plugin. Let's see if we can find something interesting to use. Let's go into the filters and let's try out Sugarbyte's WoW 2, which is a really interesting filter plugin. If you never used it, definitely check it out. They have like WoW 1 and WoW 2. WoW 1 is like the previous version. I think WoW 2 is it's not necessarily better, it's different. The two plugins, they're different from each other, but we have a whole bunch of filters that we can work with. So, and I can go in here and say like I want to have a band reject, maybe. That could be a cool one. Okay, so now I'm gonna use the LFO. Let's use a triangle shape. Can add some distortion, and we still have a completely mono sound right now, so that's really good. That's what I want. Let's see, let's add one to the resonance as well. We can play around with the different distortion types. I really like the sine distortion. I am gonna bring the level of this down a bit because it's getting a little bit loud, so let's bring this down a bit. So that's made a little bit of a change. Now maybe try something of the Sound Toys library. That could be cool. Maybe do like the Phase Mistress. Yeah, let's just try that. The Phase Mistress will actually completely change the phase of the sound. It's kind of like a phaser, actually. Well, it is a phaser basically, but it's a different kind of phaser than the one that's, for instance, coming with Ableton Live. It sounds really interesting compared to the default Ableton Live one. So let's just go through some of the presets. So this one really makes it stereo, and that's not what I want. So let's see if we can actually change that. If we bring this up, no, it's creating this stereo width, which I don't want right now. I do want to have stereo width, but not right now. So that did it. Just make sure that you switch the phase and resonance phase to both positive or both negative. That will make sure that you have a pretty much still mono sound. Now we can actually go in here and just play around with these. And see. Let's see if we can find something interesting. The triggered ones, maybe. I really like the sound of that one, so I think I'm gonna use this. Now, there's no offset going on, so this looks good. So again, we are now losing a bit of bass, I think. We might wanna bring up span to see what's going on. Yeah, so it's really affecting the bass frequencies as well, which again I don't want. I want to have a solid bass. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna high pass this layer. So we're still getting that phase movement, just not on the sub bass. Now what I need to do is bring in another chain, and I'm gonna call this one effect chain 3. And now we need a chain that actually has the solid low end that we now cut out of the other layers. So I can do this, and let's just make it a little bit less steep and just do something like that. So this layer now sounds like, and that sounds like this with the other layers. See how we now have a good solid sub right here? And we're still losing a bit of sub during this part of the sound, but that's not an issue. We're gonna be working on that in a minute. So now I have this layer. And what I need to do is I need to add some multiband compression to this to basically just smooth out that loss in volume that we get at some point in the sound. So I'm gonna go to my multiband compressors, and I'm gonna use FabFilter Pro MB, which is my favorite multiband compressor, and I can use the mono one because this sound, this layer needs to be perfectly mono. There's also a helicopter outside, which I'm not sure what they're doing. Let me do that so it's a little bit darker in here. So the sub bass, you can see here it's kind of like fluctuating a bit in volume. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this right here, and let me see. Now we're getting a good, nice, solid sub bass. Sounds pretty good, actually. So now, what can we do to further change this up? The first thing that we should do right now, it's something we haven't talked about yet. It's adding stereo width to a sound like this. Because right now we have a good sounding reese with a good bottom end, but it's still perfectly mono. So before I would actually go and process this with distortion plugins, I always like to add in a little bit of dirt or a little bit of stereo width. So how we can do that? Well, there's a whole variety of ways we can do that. We're about 30 minutes into the video, so we have about another 30 minutes to go on this video. There's a whole variety of ways you can add stereo width. Of course, stuff like reverb, delays, ping pong delays, for instance, but flanges, phasers, any kind of like time smearing effects will be able to create stereo width. So there is a way how we could do this. Now, let's just close this rack down. I'm pretty happy with the way this sounds. Or no, let's do it in this rack actually. Let's create a stain. Let's create a chain called stereo width, and I'm gonna solo this one. And I want to add stereo width to this particular layer. So one way to do it is to go into my instruments and let's use the X4 Records Serum effects in this layer, because I know that the Serum effects plugin comes with the hyper and the dimension, which are actually time smearing effects. So I'm gonna try to see how the hyper sounds on this one. And in this phase of the sound design process, you got to be aware to flip back to mono every moment that you check the sound to see if it sounds good, because switching it to mono will show you if the stereo width that you've just added is actually affecting the mono version of the sound as well, which is really important because you don't want to lose the strength that the mono signal has. So let's add the hyper dimension to this. You can immediately hear we're getting a lot of stereo width now. So I can change this. So we're adding a bit of stereo width with this one right now. I'm also going to add a little bit of chorus, and the thing with chorus is usually what people will do when they make reese basses is they will add chorus to just the high frequencies. And you can actually do that in Serum, because if we just bring the chorus all the way up, now it's adding chorus to the low frequencies, which is like the complete opposite of what we want. So what we could do is right here you have this low pass filter, which actually controls well, basically the filter of which everything below this cutoff point is being affected by the chorus and everything above it isn't. So it's actually just a filter, as you can see. So we're now just adding it to the low frequencies. But if I click this little LPF switch, because it's actually a switch, it now says high pass filter. So now we're adding that chorus only to the high end, which is pretty much what you would want when you're making neuro sounds or doing reeses. Now the amount, the rate, I usually go pretty subtle on this one. And maybe bring the depth down. And now when I bring the mix down, we're gonna hear the original sound again, but with a little bit of stereo width. I might want to bring the mix on the hyper down. We just want to add a little bit of stereo width. We don't want to add like a ridiculous amount of stereo width, because that is definitely going to give us problems when we're going to convert it back to mono. So now maybe try the phaser. I just like to play around with these effects and just add them and see what happens. Now this layer is actually sounding good already, but we can try playing around with this filter. There's some really cool filters in here, but let's try playing around with the reverb one. Let's just add that. Now, the thing what's gonna happen now is I think this layer still has a lot of sub. And again, that sub is moving around. So what are we gonna do is I'm gonna add a high pass filter to this, and I'm gonna start high passing this. Because I only want to have these stereo width kind of things. I only want to have it in the high end. I want the sub and the mids and the bass to be completely mono, so that it's as powerful as it can be. So now I'm kind of like cutting out everything except the high frequencies. And the cutoff point is something we need to play around with. So let's just play this back, and without the stereo width in it, and let's add it. So to see what we're actually doing in terms of stereo width, I think I have a plugin which clearly shows the effect it's actually having on the stereo width. Let's see if I have one. I think was it BX Control? I'm not too sure which one of these it actually is. I don't use these too often. No, it wasn't that one. Then I guess it's the Stereo Maker. Which one is it? I'm not sure which one of these. Now you're probably, we'll see, it's probably this one, the solo one. I know I've used it like earlier this week, and it's actually a really good one to check. No, it's also not this one. I'm not too sure, man. I had this one. Maybe it's this one actually. Okay, it's not this one, but I guess this one works as well. Without the stereo sound, it doesn't display it, which is... I hoped we would actually see a graph right here, but we're not getting that, so let's get rid of this one. It's not really that usable for us right now. I really don't know which plugin I used. I had this one plugin and I could actually clearly see what was going on. I'm not too sure, man. I'm not sure which one of these it actually is. I used it like earlier this week. Maybe it's this one. The AOM stereo imager. Yes, this is the one. Okay, so this one actually has a graph which shows us how much stereo width we have. So without any of this is just the change that I have without the stereo width chain, and it's still pretty much mono. If the line is sitting right here in the center, that means we're pretty much in mono. Let's play just this chain. We can see it's adding a bit of stereo width right here, and if we change the settings in Serum effects, we should be able to see an increase in stereo width. So let's say if I bring the chorus up, we get more stereo width. We actually get a different shape as well. Do it like that. Let's bring this one up. So that's really adding a lot of stereo width. So you can see we're really getting more stereo width now. And let's start bringing this layer in and keep a close eye on this particular graph. See how we're now getting a little bit more stereo width. I can bring up the side gain. So changing that one will now affect how much width we have. If we bring this one up, we get more stereo width. So we now have a bass sound that's a lot better than what it was before. And we might actually be able to just process this a little bit more. We could go in and add another chorus. For instance, I like the Blue Cat chorus. It's a little bit of a different sounding chorus plugin than the native Ableton Live one, but it's actually, in my opinion, it sounds really, really good. So you can hear it sounds really interesting. And it makes the sound a lot more stereo. So I think this is doing pretty good now, and with all the layers together, it's actually starting to sound good. I'm gonna bring that stereo width layer down a little bit because I want to add a bunch of distortion after this, and that will bring up that stereo width as well, and it will gel all these layers together. Now I do want to try what happens when I feed a little bit of the dry chain back into this particular sound. So that's sounding good. I think right now would be the time to start adding a little bit of distortion to it. So I'm gonna go in here and let's just try Isotope Trash 2. Isotope Trash 2 is my go-to distortion plugin because it's just so goddamn versatile. You can create pretty much any type of distortion you want with this particular plugin. I mean, seriously. It's a little bit of a big plugin though, so if it slows down your computer, that might be why. You can see I'm already getting a little bit of lag now. When it comes to distortion and resampling, I usually start out with just adding one particular distortion type. And right now, maybe it would actually be a nice one to add distortion to these individual layers. So let's add Isotope Trash to the bandpass layer. And why I'm doing this is I think if we process these layers individually with a single band distortion first, and then add a multiband distortion on top of that just to slightly change the sound, we will be able to get a really good sounding reese. So the first one, let's try one of these. So I like the sound of that one. Let's go to stage 2. Maybe do So that's our first layer. Let's hear this with all the other layers. So you can hear how that already changed the sound up a lot. Let's go to the next layer, which is our notch filter with the cabinet and the wow2 and the phase mistress. Let's add Isotope Trash 2 to this one as well, but I'm gonna add it before the EQ because I don't want to bring up the sub frequencies again, because I don't need sub in this layer, right? So again, I'm gonna do a single band distortion on this one, to kind of like bring up a little bit of grit, I guess, just to make it sound a bit grittier. I guess maybe we could try one of the drive modes. Harmonic control is a good one. And let's try stage 2. Let's try some saturation, push-pull maybe. Or tape saturation. Okay, so now that is a low layer, and I think I want to add a bit of processing to this as well. I guess normally I would add tape saturation to the lows, but we can do that in the final instance of trash when we do the multiband distortion. So I'm not going to use trash on this layer now. I'm going to keep this one pretty much the same. I do want to add a little bit of distortion to the stereo width layer. I think that's a good one. It's gonna kind of like, I don't know, affect the stereo width maybe. And if we just bring this up a little bit so it's a little bit louder, we might actually get more stereo width in the final sound. This is really something I have to play around with to see what works and what doesn't. I guess we need to do this in context. That just adds a little bit to it. I don't want to do too much of this stereo width right now. So now let's go into the final isotope trash, which is the one that I put here, and I'm going to put this one in multiband mode. So now we are in multiband mode, and I can solo the sub. So that's a good sub. Let me bring the tape saturation up. You can hear it's really gonna bring up the sub as well, and I can bring the mix down to kind of like blend it in as much as I want. And I might wanna put a little bit of a utility on this track before the isotope trash, because we're already clipping and I want to make sure we're not. So now we have a little bit more room to work with. For the mid layer, let's try one of these. Let's do maybe capacity. I recently liked this one on mid-range, even though it creates this little squeaky sound. You can always just cut that out, but I usually just bring it low in the mix. This one, it doesn't sound too good. Let's try double stages. That sounds much better. Let's go to the high frequencies. Here we can do clip control, which is usually really good on the high frequencies. Really gonna make the high frequencies stand out a lot. Just bring that mix down. Now we can go into here and do a second stage to the mid-range. think that's sounding good. Let's compare the before and after. Made it a lot louder. I do think we need to bring up the tape saturation a little bit. So I think that is about it for this sound now. We now have a more wider sound, and I can show you the before and after. If I just group all of these effects. Come on. You can see right now we're getting towards the end of a processing chain, and my PC is already, well, not liking this at all, as you can see. But we're getting there. Come on. Respond. Okay, it's going to be one of those again. Yeah. So, are we gonna respond or what? Okay, we're back. Let me just take all of these effects and group them in a rack, so I can easily just switch it off and on. So now I can switch this off. This is the default reese we had. Really mono, but it sounds good. But you know, the sub is not consistent, and what I said, it's like it's completely mono. So that's what we had, and this is how it sounds now. And now you can actually go in here, for instance, and say, maybe I want to have a different filtering going on right here. I don't like that increase at the start right away. I just want to have a bit more slower movement. We can do that. We can now go in and change all these things. So now if I create a new audio track and set the input to resampling and ARM enable this track, turn looping off, I will now be able to record the sound and show you how it looks now. So let's see. So it looks really good. We're still losing a little bit of sub right around here, but that just means that we're probably not going to be using this part of the bass. We could bring it up if we want to, but I don't really think it's needed right now. I think it's a better option to just work with this, which already sounds good, or work with this part, any of the two. Now let's listen to this and see how it sounds in mono, because this is how it would sound in mono, of course. And as you can see, those two sound exactly the same whether or not this plugin is turned on or off. So I can turn this on and switch it to mono. and it's just gonna sound exactly the same. Oh wait, I think we just heard both tracks. So this is our process track. Now this is our track with the stereo width in it, okay? So it has a little bit of stereo width in the high end of the sound, but it's not really that pronounced, and when we switch this to mono, it pretty much still sounds the same. But this sound is wider now, so we can actually start processing this further, and the more we process it, the more we can bring up that stereo width. And maybe you still think like this is not wide enough. What you can also do to make it even wider is we can put this in a sampler, or we can add well, there's a couple of things we can do actually. You can put it in a sampler and detune it so that you have like two instances of this sound and detune them from each other, which is going to create stereo width. But you also got to be aware that it's also going to add the stereo width and the detuning to the sub frequency. So if you want to do that, make sure you have a solid low pass version going on, and then have like two high passed ones that are detuned from each other. So that's only going to detune the high frequencies and the high mids, but it's actually leaving the low frequencies and the low mids completely mono. That's something you could do. Another thing you can do to make this more stereo is to just start processing it further. And if that doesn't do the trick, you can always add a stereo layer to this sound. So I would do that within the original sound. So if we go in here, you can see we have like all this processing on here, right? I would like maybe add another track with maybe a super sawish kind of sound, which we might just do right now while we're at it. So which synth is good for super saws? I would say Serum. It's really good, and Serum is capable of making sounds that are really wide, so that's a good place to start. I would add Serum to a track like that. Now the note I'm using here is an F note, so I can put in an F note and it will or should sound in key with the reese. Let me just put an F note in here. So now we have an F note, and I'm gonna make it a little bit shorter. And I can add a bunch of voices to that. To create that stereo kind of sound. And you know, we could add maybe another layer, do one of the monster ones and add some width to that as well. And we can maybe add a little bit of notch filter in here, move that around with an LFO that is set to a pretty slow rate, and then I'm just gonna change the shape of that LFO a bit. So that's something like that. Just adding a little bit of movement to that. And when I now play this together with the reese we have, it should sound pretty cool. See how this now sounds really wide, but it's actually just coming from this layer. And if we switch this to mono, we're losing a lot of that stereo width. We're losing a lot of the supersaw, because that sound is pretty much sitting in the stereo sides of the spectrum. It's not really sitting too much in the middle, and we can even affect that further if we take EQ8 add it onto the supersaw layer, and I'm gonna switch this to mid-side mode, and in the mid frequencies I'm gonna cut pretty much everything in the low mids, everything below 1K. So let's go to the sides. I'm gonna boost some of those. So when I now play this with the main reese, it's sounding really interesting. Another thing we could do is take this entire chain. Do I want to do that now? Let's just record this one first. Wait a second. Almost recorded on the wrong track. Yeah, we're getting a little bit of clipping now, so I might want to bring this down a bit, and you can see we've clipped it right here, which is not really a problem, but so now we have this one as well, and we can just put that here. And what I now want to try is to take all of this that's on this track, cut it, so we're actually removing it from this track now. And this might take a little bit of a while. Okay, we're over 1 hour video right now, so I think this is going to be the last thing I'm doing on this sound. And now take these two, group them together in a group track, and I'm going to paste the processing on the group instead of on the reese base. So now the processing we applied earlier on is going to be applied to not only the reese, but also to the supersaw, and that will help to gel these layers together and make it sound like they are one single sound instead of two different layers. Because what this is gonna do is gonna add that phase modulation to the supersaw. It's gonna add the filtering we did, the parallel filtering. It's also gonna add the distortion to the supersaw. So we might actually have to bring the supersaw down a lot in volume, because it's gonna bring the level of that up as well. But if we do this, it might actually sound pretty damn interesting. But we have to wait until this hell of a computer decides to work and decides to do something, because my computer is just slow as fuck. I guess that's it. So now I'm gonna turn the supersaw down a lot. Just play this. Theoretically now it should sound exactly the same as this one. And I'm gonna bring that supersaw up just a bit. Not hearing it yet. So now we're getting a lot of that stereo width. Let's see what happens if we switch this to mono. We aren't really losing any power, we are not losing any sub when I switch this to mono. The only thing we are losing is pretty much the little bit of stereo width we added with the chorus on the high end, and a little bit of that stereo width that comes from the supersaw. But because the supersaw is now running through the same processing as the reese bass, it's gonna sound similar to the reese bass, and the movement is gonna be similar, or maybe even identical. And that means that these two sounds now pretty much sound like one whole sound instead of two separate sounds that are layered or stacked on top of each other. So we can record this one now. And right off the bat, if we compare this one to the one that we had before here, where we had them as separate layers, you can see that it's much more evened out already. We don't get as much spikes, so that means we get a little bit less stereo width, but it's not really, it's not a problem. And when we zoom in, that's another thing you can do to check if your sub bass is actually solid. If we look here, the main fundamental frequency, it doesn't really change between the left and right channel. They're pretty much the same in the left and right channel. The only thing that actually changes, is the little bit of noise stuff that's going on. If we compare this, for instance, you can see right here we have some noise stuff going on, which is different from the top one, but that's pretty much the only thing that's really changing in the stereo width. But that's different between these two. The fundamental frequency is pretty much spot on in both the top and bottom channel, or the left and right channel I should say. So yeah, that's pretty good. I would say this is a good and solid reese now. So we've now turned this simple reese that we had into a much more complicated reese that sounds a lot heavier. There's still a little bit of work to done to actually turn this into something we could use into a track, but we're getting closer to what I think sounds like a good solid reese bass. So if you like this video, comment, like and subscribe. If you decide to subscribe, be aware to click the little bell icon that's right next to the subscribe button. What that'll do is it'll turn on notifications for my channel, so that when I upload a video, you get notified about that upload and you will be able to watch the video as early as possible. Also, you might have saw that in the bottom left corner I have a little Discord statistics thing going on. You can join my music production chat. There's a lot of people in there. We've already went over 300 members and we're still growing. Every video I upload, a bunch of new members come in, and it's just a chat where we can nerd out about music production. There's a lot of people in there who create neurofunk and neuro kind of sound, so if you are looking to get better at that particular kind of thing, definitely check out our chat room, because there's a lot of people in there that can actually help you with that. Other than that, there's some other cool things coming up on this channel. I'm working on a couple of new things. There's also good news again from Black Octopus Sound. All the products that were on my web store are going to be re-released on Black Octopus Sound pretty soon. So I guess somewhere in the upcoming weeks or months they will start to roll them out. They're gonna be rolling them out in probably 2 different phases, so they're not gonna be released all at once, but they will be available when time passes. It's just gonna take a little bit of time before all these packs are released. That's gonna be coming in the upcoming months. Also, my Neurofunk pack is doing pretty well. It's doing really well on Beatport actually. It's in the number 5th spot in the Beatport Sounds drum and bass chart. So in the drum and bass sample packs, it's right now currently ranking at spot number 5, which is pretty awesome, I would say. So to all of you who bought the sample pack, I want to thank you for that. You are the ones who helped me to keep this channel going actually. So yeah, other than that, I hope you liked this video. It's again a pretty long one, but I guess you guys like to see the longer videos because you get to see more production. That's it for this video. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you back soon. Peace!